Right now, off the southern shelf where the continental drop-off plunges into the Southern Ocean, an orca is cutting through the swell with a clean, open crater punched into her flank. It is an exact circle, roughly 5 centimeters across, bored straight through thick blubber into the red muscle beneath. She does not have just one. The animals running in formation alongside her carry the same marks. And if you comb through every maritime identification archive, from the ice sheets of Antarctica right up into the tropical waters of the Coral Sea, the exact same geometrical wound keeps appearing on whale after whale. In the brutal arithmetic of the open ocean, the killer whale sits entirely uncontested at the top. 6 tons of hydrodynamic muscle driven by an intelligence that rivals our own. She routinely hunts great white sharks. She runs down blue whales. Nothing in the water has the leverage to threaten her. Yet something out in the blue is carving chunks out of her flesh while she swims, leaving wounds that take up to 5 months to heal in cold brine. For half a century, marine scientists assumed the culprit had to be massive. The search was focused on something with larger jaws, greater mass, something sitting even higher up the trophic ladder. It was a complete misdirection. The creature responsible for these gouges weighs less than a domestic cat and would comfortably fit across your forearm. To understand why this was missed for so long, look at how the apex predator operates. In our own waters, orcas hunt with terrifying tactical precision. When confronting a great white, an orca will ram the shark, flip it upside down, and induce tonic immobility, a paralysis reflex hardwired directly into the shark's nervous system. The shark suffocates in place. Off coastal hunting grounds, orcas routinely tear open large whites solely to extract the liver, an organ packed with energy-dense fats and squalene, leaving the rest of the carcass to sink. The impact is so decisive that entire populations of white sharks will abandon decades-old aggregation sites for years after a single pod moves through. Whatever is boring holes into killer whales is certainly not a white shark, nor a tiger, a bull, or a hammerhead. The orca preys on every single one of them. The attacker is something that completely ignores the established hierarchy of marine life, an organism that operates outside conventional predatory rules. The mark itself is unmistakable, a shallow, scooped-out plug of flesh about 4 to 6 centimeters wide. When researchers began collating stranding records and long-term photographic databases across the southern hemisphere, a striking pattern emerged. Orcas that remained permanently in subpolar feeding grounds carried only faded, healed scars. The raw, bleeding craters were found exclusively on animals returning from long migrations into warm, northern, offshore waters. The attacker was never hunting in the polar south. It was lying in wait in the temperate, open ocean, letting the apex predators swim straight into its path. That migration pattern pointed straight to the identity of the ghost. It is a shark under half a meter long, shaped like a stubby, dark cigar with a blunt snout that would look utterly unremarkable if you pulled it from a trawl net off the continental shelf. Commercial fishers simply called it the cookie cutter shark. Science filed it under Cystius brasiliensis. Its evolutionary strategy is a masterclass in deception. During daylight hours, the cookie cutter hangs in the twilight zone of the water column, thousands of meters down, riding the deep scattering layer, that vast migrating biomass of squid, small fish, and crustaceans that lifts toward the surface at dusk and drops back down at dawn. It is the greatest daily migration of life on Earth, and the shark moves with it. Yet a creature this small should lack the buoyancy to hold position in open water against fast-moving pelagic hunters. The shark solves this through biology. Its liver is enormous, packed with low-density oils that render it neutrally buoyant. It does not waste energy swimming to maintain depth. It hangs motionless in the dark water column, expending almost zero metabolic energy, waiting for 6 tons of apex predator to blunder into its airspace. Then comes the visual trick. The underside of the cookie cutter is densely studded with photophores, tiny biological light organs that emit a soft, greenish glow. This is counter-illumination camouflage, identical in principle to military aircraft painted to blend into the sky. Anything looking up from the deep sees the faint ambient moonlight filtering down from the surface. Without the glowing belly, a solid fish shape would cast a sharp, dark silhouette. The shark matches the downwelling light precisely, effectively vanishing into the water column dot. Except for one critical feature. Around its throat sits a dark, unilluminated collar, completely devoid of photophores. Against the glowing backdrop of its belly, that small dark ring looks precisely like a lone, vulnerable baitfish drifting helplessly in the open dot. To a tuna, a billfish, or an orca scanning the depths, it looks like an easy, solitary mouthful. The pelagic hunter surges forward to intercept the easy meal. At the last possible fraction of a second, the tiny shark pivots. Its muscular lips clamp onto the flank of the hunter, creating an airtight vacuum seal like a rubber sucker pressed against glass dot. The upper jaw deploys small, hooked teeth that do nothing except anchor the animal to the thrashing host. The lower jaw does the actual mechanical work. Its teeth are disproportionately massive compared to the shark's body size, fused edge to edge into a single, continuous curved cutting blade. The cookie cutter drives those blades deep into the flesh, rolls its entire cylindrical body in a vicious 360-degree twist, and shears out a clean plug of muscle, the exact shape of a cork dot. Before the host animal has even registered the pain or initiated a defensive strike, the shark lets go, dropping back into the blackness of the trench with its prize secured. Calcium and energy are desperately scarce in the deep, and the cookie cutter wastes nothing. When its lower teeth eventually wear down, it does not shed them individually into the silt like other sharks. It swallows the entire connected set whole to recycle the minerals dot. It is a specialized parasite that feeds exclusively on the most dangerous hunters in the ocean. The hosts almost always survive, swimming away with a permanent, healed crater in their hide, carrying the ecological ledger of their travels etched directly into their skin. A conventional predator has to win a brutal, exhausting fight to eat. A parasite of the deep only needs 2 seconds of deception. This biological mechanism is remarkable enough on its own, but the real disturbance began when this tiny creature started colliding with modern human engineering. During the height of naval tensions across the Pacific, frontline military submarines began slipping back into port with anomalous structural failures. These multi-billion-dollar vessels were returning with circular wounds punched straight through their rubber sonar domes, deep gouges chewed out of external acoustic tiles, and heavy protective sheathing stripped entirely from trailing sensor cables, leaving bare copper exposed to corrosive saltwater dot. This was not a cosmetic issue to be brushed off at dry dock. A submarine's forward sonar dome is a precision-engineered, fluid-filled acoustic window designed to let sound waves pass unimpeded. When a dome is punctured, the internal fluid drains out, the internal hydrophones flood, and the vessel is effectively rendered blind and deaf in deep water dot. With dozens of boats crippled across different patrols, naval intelligence initially suspected covert foreign sabotage, some new undersea interception technology deployed specifically to neutralize tactical advantage during maritime standoffs. But when defense scientists placed core samples of the damaged neoprene rubber under high-magnification microscopes, they found no trace of mechanical tooling or explosive residue. What they found instead was a distinctive biological signature: clean, hooked scoring across the upper rim and a single, continuous, scalloped cut along the base dot. The shape was identical to the gouges that had been cataloged on migratory whales for over a century. The Navy was not facing a foreign adversary. They were dealing with a 50-centimeter shark that had evaluated a 100-meter nuclear vessel, determined its slow acoustic pulse and thick rubber skin resembled the flank of a massive pelagic mammal, and taken a bite out of it. You cannot deploy countermeasures against an animal that simply cannot be intimidated. There was no sonar frequency or defensive posture that could deter a creature operating purely on evolutionary instinct. The only workable solution was to overhaul the external design entirely, retrofitting tough fiberglass casings over every exposed rubber boot and sensory node to physically block the bite. The same circular damage soon began appearing on commercial seismic arrays, oil and gas survey gear, and oceanographic instruments moored off the continental shelf. Marine contractors hauling equipment out of the deep found their underwater telemetry cables chewed to the core, severed by a predator that saw no practical difference between synthetic industrial insulation and whale blubber. For generations, humans assumed we were exempt from this specific interaction simply because we do not swim in pitch-black open ocean over deep trenches. But that boundary would not hold forever. For decades, the standard scientific consensus held that cookie-cutter sharks posed zero direct threat to living humans. This was not born out of comforting optimism, but from the pragmatic field evidence available at the time. Whenever those trademark circular gouges were documented on human remains recovered from open water, usually drowning victims or crew lost overboard along commercial shipping corridors, marine pathologists consistently classified the bites as post-mortem scavenging. The working assumption was straightforward. The shark was an opportunistic feeder that only went to work on inert, non-responsive matter drifting helplessly in the current. That tidy medical assumption collapsed completely during an extreme open ocean crossing. In the dead of night, halfway through an endurance swim across an exposed deep-water channel over abyssal drop-offs, a long-distance swimmer was cutting through heavy, rolling swell. Around midnight, miles from any land, he felt an abrupt, sharp puncture in his chest. Believing he had brushed against a piece of flotsam or a rogue jellyfish tentacle, he pushed forward into the dark. Moments later, a second impact struck his left calf with crushing mechanical force, driving deep into the muscle and halting his stroke completely. When his support crew hauled him into the escort craft and brought a floodlight onto the deck, the nature of the injury was immediately obvious. It was not a tear, a crush injury, or a jagged tooth scrape from a standard reef shark. It was a textbook, precision-engineered crater, roughly the circumference of a golf ball, bored cleanly through the skin and deep into the underlying red calf tissue dot. The formal investigation that followed overturned 50 years of comfortable marine biology. The cookie cutter was not waiting for an animal to die before feeding. It was actively hunting living, moving targets in the open column. To an ambush predator scanning upward from hundreds of meters below against the moonlight, a human kicking on the surface produces the exact same silhouette as a juvenile seal, a sunfish, or a wounded tuna. It does not pause to run an identity check or consider whether its target has hands or flippers. It simply locks onto the shadow, charges into the illuminated zone, anchors its jaws, and takes its core sample dot. This revelation triggered intense debate among offshore emergency responders, marine rescue volunteers, and fisheries authorities along our outer coastal margins. For years, rescue units had treated nighttime water retrievals solely around hypothermia, strong drift currents, and large coastal predators like tigers or bull sharks. Suddenly, they had to contend with a miniature, hyper-specialized parasite capable of disabling a swimmer in seconds without ever being detected on radar or visual watch. When you step back and look at the broader trophic architecture of the open sea, the existence of this tiny parasite reveals a profound, unwritten rule of marine ecosystems. We are conditioned to view the natural world through a strictly linear lens. Big things eat smaller things. Mass dictates dominance, and the apex predator at the crest of the food web moves through its environment entirely untouchable. In our terrestrial landscapes, from the arid spinifex plains to the dense coastal scrub, apex hunters like dingoes or large raptors shape the behavior of everything below them through sheer predatory pressure. But the open ocean operates under a completely different thermodynamic reality. Down in the black, the cookie-cutter shark turns the entire trophic hierarchy on its head. It does not compete with great whites, swordfish, or orcas for territory, nor does it attempt to bring them down. Instead, it systematically taps into the enormous energy reserves accumulated by these massive pelagic nomads. By carving out discrete, energy-rich plugs of blubber and muscle from animals thousands of times its size, It acts as a biological tax on the ocean's most powerful hunters. And it does not operate alone in this niche. Deeper still lurks a second, even more elusive relative, the largemouth cookie cutter, Icystius plutotus. Equipped with an even broader jaw span, it gouges out massive, elongated trenches of tissue from whatever it strikes. Encountered so rarely by research vessels and commercial longliners that its life history remains almost completely unmapped, it stands as proof that the mesopelagic zone holds entire hidden tiers of specialized parasitic predators. Consider the ecological cascade this creates. Every time an orca or a large pelagic shark ascends into warm surface waters, it is forced to navigate a minefield of invisible, glowing ambushers. The resulting wounds take months of metabolic energy to heal in cold water, forcing these massive mammals to divert nutritional resources simply to repair their outer hides and fight off secondary marine infections. The small, unnoticed organisms at the base of the pelagic food web are actively exerting physical, physiological, and behavioral pressure on the apex titans above them. It is an elegant, brutal balance. The cookie cutter does not destroy the population of its hosts. To kill them outright would be to destroy its own mobile, self-replenishing food supply. Instead, it skims just enough off the top of the trophic pyramid to sustain vast populations of deep-water organisms, quietly cycling high-grade energy from the ocean's largest surface predators straight back down into the nutrient-starved abyss. This dynamic forces a total recalibration of how we understand the wild. In our popular imagination, the animals that dominate our shores and offshore shelves are defined by raw physical supremacy. We build our cultural narratives around the great white, the tiger shark, the salt-crusted leviathans that patrol our headlands and outer reefs. We assume that survival in an unforgiving climate always comes down to sheer mass, jaw power, and the ability to overpower everything in your line of sight. Yet out in the deep blue, the most effective evolutionary blueprint is a creature barely 50 centimeters long that weighs less than a water bottle and has never once won a stand-up fight. It does not need to. It simply adapted to the fundamental weaknesses of the giants around it. By turning its own belly into a mirror of the night sky, it turns the predatory drive of the apex hunters into the very mechanism of their downfall, letting their own momentum carry them straight into the blades. The open ocean does not care about our tidy trophic charts or our romantic ideas of top predators. It is an unyielding, pragmatic system governed purely by energy economics and opportunistic survival. The cookie-cutter shark exposes the reality that even the most formidable animals on Earth are bound by subtle vulnerabilities, policed by small, invisible organisms that carve out an existence on the narrowest of margins. That is the enduring truth of these offshore waters. Power is never absolute, and the real architects of the wild are rarely the ones that make the headlines or the warning signs along our beaches. My name is Ambrose Wield. Out here on the continental fringe, where deep trenches meet the shallows, there are countless creatures operating under rules we are only beginning to decipher. Organisms that quietly dismantle everything biology textbooks claim they can and cannot do. Every single week, we pull back the surface of another untamed ecological puzzle, breaking down the mechanics of the creatures that shape our wild world from the shadows. If you want to understand how the living systems around us actually work beneath the surface, subscribe and join us for the next investigation.